So this week, or the past 2 weeks really, been reading Yearning, Race, Gender, and Cultural Politics by Bell Hooks. Again, just a huge fan of Bell Hooks and her perspectives and in everything, how, and I know I've said this in the past couple videos, but how everything is with the Black woman in the forefront. It's the first thought. So, typically in dialogue, people may say men and women, or, male, female, but Bell Hooks always, and I'm pretty sure it started off as something that maybe was not natural, or maybe it was. But now it's always like, if we're looking at woman-male relationships or female-male relationships, something like that, it's always the female in the forefront, which I think is amazing. This book was pretty much what I looked at it as, and what Bell Hooks does a lot, I'm realizing as I watch her on YouTube and read her books, is that it's always a cultural critique of various things, whether it be books, whether it be movies, style of dress, style of clothing, all of those kind of things. And one thing that she talked about, and I'm not sure, or early in the book, if I was maybe too young, because I don't even know when I first watched The Color Purple, but one of the things that she talked about that I thought was very interesting, and it's because I haven't read the book The Color Purple by Alice Walker, but one of the things that she talked about, and I mention that because that means I don't have a frame of reference between the book and the movie, but one of the things that Bell Hooks mentioned is the downplaying of Mr.'s transformation from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie, and how the movie, with it being directed by Steven Spielberg, sort of acted to vilify the Black man even further, or downplay the dynamics behind the character of Mr. Where in the movie, and I didn't even notice it because, of course, Mr. was so much vilified in the movie that I didn't even care to know that he had become this more understanding and humble kind of guy. I didn't care to know that because he was so much vilified in the beginning of the book that who cares to know who Mr. is? But it's like that parallels how America views Black men, and like, who cares to know who you are because you're this frightening thing that must be handled, and more often than not, in my opinion, disposed of. However, you can do that either in the prison system without access to education, murder, or drugs, or anything like that. So I thought that was very interesting, because in that chapter she talks about men and Black women coming together and not creating this adversarial relationship that hinders true liberation on both parts, and also true emancipation from the ideas that we have about each other. So I thought that was very, very interesting. Let's see. She also talks about when Black feminist scholars are discussing bodies of work, not only Black feminist scholars, but also white feminist scholars too, but the hesitation or outright refusal to discuss works of people outside of the movement, i.e. males, i.e. men that maybe have been classified as sexist and things like that, that refusal to include them in the body of work and the body of understanding, and how that does any scholar a disservice when you are opposed to hearing points of views that are different than yours, because there's something, as if there is nothing to be gained from reading people with opposing views, because then you have no counterpoint to whatever your thought process is. So I thought that was very interesting. She says, if we are ever to construct a feminist movement that is not based on the premise that men and women are always at war with one another, then we must be willing to acknowledge the appropriateness of complex critical responses to writings by men, even if it is sexist, which makes a great deal of sense to me. While it may be bothersome, but it's still something that we can think about and process and understand, and add to just the body of knowledge and give a more critical understanding of our stance. If you never have an opposing view, how can you be sure that what you believe in is surely what you believe in if you've never been presented with anything different? So I thought that was very, very interesting. When she mentions in the chapter about representations that sarcasm and ridicule are ways of talking about women that reinforce male sexism and domination. It is easy to see why feminists view Reed as an enemy. And I thought about much of pop culture, much of what we consider satire and things you see maybe like on what's his name? Bill something on the show that he has on HBO, where he's very sarcastic and very cynical and things like that. But there's a lot of sarcasm pointed at, sometimes more than often, women of color, women in general. But it's always taken as lighthearted, like, oh yeah, no, I'm just being sarcastic. But really, what's behind that? What's driving that? Let's see what else we have here. There's one chapter called Third World Divas, which I thought was pretty much very, very interesting, when she talks about the intersections of race, class, and gender. Because class is something that I often overlook until it's thrown in my face. And just with my upbringing, growing up in a very, I guess it could be classified as rough neighborhood in Atlanta. Just a lot of times I'm not sure if I pretend like I come from a different class. Like maybe my family is more affluent than maybe I would like others to know. No, I think that comes off wrong. Like my family has money when they don't. Like my family had money when they didn't. Like I have money when I don't. Those kind of things. And so it's not until people talk about, for example, in my program, there's a software, Dragonfly, where I could create an annotated bibliography, and I could just speak it into this software, and it pretty much creates like a Word document of everything, every quote in every book that I want to have. And I asked my classmate how much it costs, and you're like, oh, it only costs like $180. And I'm thinking, only $180? Like, I just got my job. Like I just moved into my own apartment, and I'm still helping my mom out financially, and I'm still trying to make it financially. I don't have $180 to buy that. And so thankfully, one of my classmates showed me a free software where I can get it. But it was that moment where and I don't think she meant it. And I would have to process that. But there was a moment of shame or inadequacy that I felt, that she so cavalierly said that this program is only $180. Like I should just go buy it right now while I was in class. And I'm thinking, I don't have it to buy. But anyway, Bell Hooks talks about the intersections of class when it comes to the feminist movement and how there's still those separations. And she says in the first page of the chapter, she said on page 89, she says, signifying tends to provoke negative feedback, as there is much emphasis on a notion of friendship and sisterly bonding that is based on principles of seamless harmony. No one really speaks about the way in which class privilege informs feminist notions of social behavior, setting standards that would govern all feminist interaction. Often, the nice behavior privileged white women had rebelled against in their relationship with white men was transposed into the relationships between white women and women of color. I thought that was very interesting because, it gets to the point which is anti everything Audre Lorde was talking about, in that we feel like for the sake of sisterhood and bonding that we have to be just alike, but there is so much to be gained in our differences. But if we're just going to dwell on the surface and never really get to the core of each other, then we never really know. And we just pretend to be these different things, and we become these pretend fictional characters to each other without really fostering any true bonds or relationships. And I don't know how any movement, let alone a movement based on solidarity and bonding and womanhood, could really progress if we're just gonna remain stagnant and keep these shallow relationships. So I thought that was dead on. Let's see. One of the things that she talked about in the same chapter, Third World Diva Girls, was about the relationship that women have with each other. And that's something that's always something to be understood and studied. Because she talked about how we can often be very harsh to each other, especially when we're going to play the politically correct game, that we can be so harsh towards each other in a way that we wouldn't be otherwise, or if we had like a sense of community from the beginning, that we wouldn't talk to each other in such a way. So she talked about how in certain settings, black women scholars become more idolized, like held in some form of reverence, just for our presence and being there. And it's like, it's like that whole, oh my God, you're so brave, and thank you for sharing your story. And it's just amazing, like how you live through that, and you're so strong, and that kind of adoration. But she says, of course, she said we need to interrogate reverence, for our idolization can be another way one is objectified and not really taken seriously. So I think, and I know if I were to become a teacher, I would do this, because my expectations of black men are such that when I see them achieve something, I'm elated. And I know that's bad, and it's shameful, because it's like, what do I think about, my brother or my father or my uncles, so much that anything they do becomes something I'm like, oh my gosh, you are to be applauded for that. And it becomes a handicap, and it means it sets the standard so low for my future male students. It set the standard so low for a future partner. It set the standard so low for everything. When it doesn't take much to be pleased, or when they do well on a paper, or they speak, when their thoughts are profound in class, and I'm just amazed by it. And that lets you know, like I learned in the counseling class, anytime you see someone do something and you're like blown away by it, it presents a bias to you. So if I see a white girl with rhythm, I'm like, oh my God, look at you dancing so well. And it's like, okay, so my bias is that white women can't dance, because otherwise I would not be surprised by that. So I just thought that was very interesting, and something I definitely need to work on. Finally, the last thing I thought was very, very interesting and intriguing was the chapter where she is talking to herself. It's the final chapter in the book. Well, not the final chapter, the second to last chapter in the book. And it's called Interview with Bell Hooks by Gloria Watkins. It says, no, not talking back, just talking to myself. And I thought that was so interesting. And I'm not sure if she meant it the way that I did, but I know there would be times where I would be talking to, when I was younger, and my mom would ask me to do something and I didn't want to do it. So then I would say something smart under my breath, and my mom would be like, who are you talking to? And I'd be like, not talking to anybody, I'm just talking to myself. And she'd be like, oh, okay, that's what I thought. So I thought that was very interesting, because I thought that was, if she meant it in the way that I understood it, I thought that was something that just happened in my house, or maybe in the younger generation. So I thought that was very interesting. If I'm considered younger, I mean, I'm almost 30, but who knows? But I thought it was interesting in the sense that in my master's program, I took a counseling class, and we talked about using outdated coping mechanisms to deal with present day issues, and how that is troublesome, because that is you bringing yourself from whatever years past into today's current situation. And you from several years ago does not belong in this current situation. It's like the quote that says, you can't be who you were and who you are at the same time. And so Gloria Watkins, of course, is Bell Hooks' name. And I think the splitting of the conversation between Bell Hooks and Gloria Watkins, to me, it symbolized talking to yourself in two different places. And so at some point, Gloria Watkins asked Bell Hooks about the delineation between the two. And so she says, Gloria Watkins says something about being able to break herself into two different people. And Bell Hooks responds that she doesn't see it as two different people. It's more like two parts of a much larger whole, or just two parts of many parts that combine to make a whole. I thought that was so interesting. It would be like me talking to, myself from 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 20 years ago. And I know that to be a counseling technique when you want to go back and revisit something. And so that way you can sort of separate yourself from it and give a different, almost like omniscient view, like pulling your present day self out of a situation and retelling the story as if it's not you, as if it happened, like you're watching it happen. And I'm not sure if it makes any sense, but it reveals so much that maybe you couldn't see at the time when you're in it. So if it'd be like if I were to talk to myself when I graduated from, say, with my master's, it would be me walking my present day self through the steps of what happened in that moment and what was going through my mind. And it sort of adds a different layer of understanding. I thought that was very interesting. It's almost how I view storytelling and narrative inquiry and things like that, where if I were to do an autobiographical narrative retelling of my life, and I saw one person do it in their dissertation where they separated themselves and they almost write it as a fiction story, because it separates yourself from the pain that maybe was experienced in that time, but it also gives a different perspective. And for me, it adds a layer of depth. But all in all, I like this book a lot because there was a lot of cultural critique, and I think Bell Hooks does a great job at immersing herself in modern day culture, whether it be fashion, movies, film, books, in a way that is still a critique, and able to look at things from multiple different views. And she talks about, and I'm pretty sure it's this book, about the hesitation of Black people to critique other Black bodies of work and how that does everyone a disservice. And I really like the fact that Bell Hooks does not, shy away from that. And even if you watch her stuff on YouTube, she's still very immersed in all forms of culture. So where she knows what's going on with Beyonce and Nicki Minaj and things like that. And, what's feminism now? Is there a modified definition of feminism and all those things? So thoroughly enjoyed the book. And I'm going to do a review of Sister Citizen next. So, because I read both of them. And yes.